The doctor used the word chronic, and I remember thinking that I had moved into that flat 6 months ago, perfectly healthy. I want to tell you about what happened in that courtroom. I want to tell you about the evidence that arrived at the last possible moment, and what it meant, and what the judge did with it, because the ending of this story is not the ending I wanted, and I have not made peace with it. But to understand why that matters, why the specific shape of that injustice matters, you need to understand what 11 months in a mould-damaged student property does to a person who was, before all of it, entirely fine. My name is Naomi. I am 22 years old. I was in my second year of a pharmacy degree at the University of Leeds when I moved into a private student house on a terrace street in Hyde Park. 6 bedrooms, 5 housemates I had met once at a viewing. A landlord named Barry, who showed us around with the practiced warmth of someone who has done this particular performance many times, and has stopped believing in it. The rent was £590 a month. I paid a deposit of £885, protected, or so I was told, with a scheme. I did not check. I was 20 years old, and I trusted things that were said to me with a confident face. That is the first mistake I want to own, and the only one. The house smelled of something when I moved in. Not strongly. Just a low background note beneath the fresh paint, like something old and damp that the paint was trying to have a conversation over. I assumed it was old buildings being old buildings. I grew up in a Victorian terraced house in Harrogate. I knew what age smelled like. This felt like that. I was wrong. By October, 6 weeks after moving in, I had a persistent cough. Not a cold, not fresh as flu. A cough that sat in my chest like a tenant who had decided not to leave. Dry and irritating, and present at 3 a.m. when I was trying to sleep before a 9 o'clock lecture. By November, the cough had been joined by fatigue so heavy it felt like wearing a coat I could not take off, and a sensitivity in my sinuses that made the walk to campus in cold air feel like an act of minor violence. I went to the university GP in the second week of November. She listened to my chest, asked about my living conditions, and referred me to a respiratory specialist. The specialist used the word chronic on the 14th of December. Chronic rhinosinusitis, exacerbated by prolonged exposure to mould spores. Not a diagnosis that goes away when you leave the building. A diagnosis that stays with you. That requires management. That has, as of today, required 2 courses of steroids, 1 minor surgical procedure on my sinuses, and an ongoing prescription that cost me £22 a month, even with the NHS prepayment certificate. I had been in that house for less than 4 months. This is the moment I want to stop and reframe everything I just told you, because until 30 seconds ago, this was a story about a student with a cough and an old building. Now I want you to hear it differently. I want you to hear it as a story about a landlord who knew, or should have known, exactly what was in those walls, and who chose to paint over it and rent it to 6 students at £590 each per month. That is £3,540 a month if you are doing the maths. £42,480 a year from one house. And the thing I am quietly furious about, the thing that has not left me, is that the acquittal at the end of this story did not touch that number at all. I reported the mould formally on the 20th of January. By then it was visible, a dark bloom on the wall behind my wardrobe and a second patch on the ceiling above the window, that I had initially mistaken for a water stain. I photographed both and sent the photographs to Barry by email and by recorded post. I kept the postal receipts. Barry responded 9 days later to say he would send someone to look at it. He sent a man with a spray bottle of antifungal solution, who wiped the surface patches and left within 20 minutes. He did not look behind the wardrobe. He did not lift the carpet in the corner, where I had noticed the floor felt soft underfoot. He did not go into the roof void above the bedroom ceiling. The mould returned within 3 weeks. I reported it again. Barry said the matter had been addressed. I said it had not. He said I was likely contributing to the problem through lifestyle factors, specifically insufficient ventilation. He used that phrase in a written email. Lifestyle factors, as if the mould was a personal choice I had made. My mum's name is Carol. She drove from Harrogate, 4 hours round trip, on the first Saturday of February, because I had called her on the Thursday and she had heard something in my voice that made her get in the car 2 days later. She walked into my room and stood very still for a moment, looking at the wall behind my wardrobe, which I had pulled out to show her the full extent of what was there. Then she took out her phone and photographed everything methodically, from 4 angles, with the torch on, without speaking. She did not comfort me first, she documented first. I did not ask her to do that. She just understood, instinctively, that what I needed in that moment was a witness who would not be dismissed. Carol drove me to a citizen's advice appointment the following Monday. The advisor there referred us to a housing solicitor named Diane, who practiced in Leeds and had, she told us, a specific caseload in student housing disrepair. Diane reviewed my evidence pack, the photographs, the email chain, the GP referral letter, the specialist diagnosis, and said the case had strong grounds for a claim under the Landlord and Tenant Act 1985 and the Housing Health and Safety Rating System. She filed in the county court in March. Barry's response arrived through his solicitors in April. He denied the mould constituted a serious hazard. He denied any failure of repair obligation. He attached a contractor's report from the man with the spray bottle, stating that remedial works had been carried out and the issue resolved. He argued my ongoing symptoms predated the tenancy, citing a medical history he had no access to and appeared to have invented. It was in reading that response that something shifted in me. Not anger. I had already passed through anger and come out the other side into something colder and more precise. What I felt, reading those paragraphs, was the specific clarity of someone who has been lied to in writing, by someone who assumed she would not notice or would not care enough to fight. Barry had calculated that a 20-year-old pharmacy student with a cough was unlikely to take him to court. He had made that calculation and written it into a legal document and expected it to hold. I found that interesting. In a cold forensic, I am going to dismantle this way, I found it genuinely interesting. I want to tell you something about Barry, because I think you need it to understand the full shape of this. He owned 23 properties in Leeds, the majority let to students. He had been operating this portfolio for 11 years. In that time, he had likely faced dozens of complaints, and resolved most of them through attrition, delay, deflection, the spray bottle man, because students move on after a year, and new students arrive and the problem resets. It is not that he hated his tenants, it is that he had structured his business around the assumption that they were temporary and therefore manageable. It had worked for 11 years. He had no reason to believe it would stop working for me. The hearing was a Tuesday in September, 14 months after I had first moved in. The courtroom was on the 3rd floor of the Civil Justice Centre in Leeds, a room with fluorescent lighting and the particular acoustic quality of a space designed for serious speech, where every word lands with slightly more weight than it would elsewhere. Carol sat in the public gallery. She had taken a day off work. She was wearing her good coat, which told me everything about how she had categorised this day. Diane presented our case with the methodical precision of someone who had built it brick by careful brick. The photographs, the email timestamps, the specialist diagnosis and its causal connection to mould exposure, the contractor's report which Diane dissected efficiently, noting that the man with the spray bottle had no professional qualifications in damp remediation and that his report contained no assessment of subsurface or structural mould. Barry's solicitor cross-examined me. He suggested my respiratory condition might be attributable to stress, to urban air quality, to a pre-existing sensitivity I had not disclosed. Each suggestion was a small, careful attempt to introduce an alternative cause. I answered each one the same way, by describing what the specialist had written, in specific medical language, in a documented report. I did not raise my voice once. Carol told me afterward that she had been gripping the edge of her seat for most of it. Then, Barry's solicitor produced a document from the supplementary bundle that Diane had been given 48 hours earlier. A council environmental health survey of the property, conducted 11 months prior to my moving in response to a complaint by a previous tenant. A survey that had identified significant mould contamination in 3 of the 6 bedrooms, attributed to inadequate subfloor ventilation and a failed damp-proof membrane. The survey had been logged with the council's housing department. A remediation notice had been issued. The notice had never been complied with. Diane had not known about this document. I had not known about it. Barry's solicitor produced it as evidence that remediation had been recommended, argued that the notice represented Barry's awareness of and engagement with the issue, and submitted that the existence of the notice demonstrated a good faith process that had been interrupted by an administrative delay rather than deliberate neglect. Good faith, that phrase again. Diane challenged it immediately. She argued the remediation notice was evidence not of good faith but of prior knowledge, that Barry had rented the property to me, knowing the mould problem had been formally identified and formally unresolved. The judge, a woman named Patricia, listened to both arguments. She took the matter under consideration for 4 days. Patricia's judgment was precise, and I have read it many times. She found that the mould constituted a Category 1 hazard under the Housing Health and Safety Rating System. She found that Barry had failed in his repair obligations under the Landlord and Tenant Act. She awarded damages for disrepair of £4,200, covering my ongoing medical costs and the impact on my second year of study. She found that Barry had been aware of the historical mould issue prior to my tenancy. She did not find fraudulent misrepresentation. The remediation notice, the document that should have been the final nail, the evidence that turned the case from negligence into something worse, became, in Patricia's judgment, evidence of a systemic failure rather than a deliberate one. She drew a distinction between knowing a problem existed and knowingly concealing it in a way that met the legal threshold for fraud. Barry's prior knowledge was established. His intent to deceive was not established beyond the required standard. He was acquitted of the fraud element. £4,200 for the disrepair. Nothing for the concealment. I stood outside the Civil Justice Centre in the September afternoon, and Carol put her arm around me and said nothing for a moment. The £4,200 was real. The medical costs were real. Barry had lost, technically. But what he had not lost was the thing I had gone into that courtroom to take from him, the public record that what he did was deliberate. The formal finding that he had looked at that council notice and rented the property anyway, knowing what was in the walls. The remediation notice is still on record with the council. The county court judgment is on the public register. Whether those records protect the next student who signs a tenancy agreement with Barry, I genuinely do not know. The smell in that house, the low background note beneath the fresh paint, that detail has followed me. I rent a different flat now, in a different part of Leeds, and on the day I moved in, I stood in the hallway and breathed in for a long moment. Just air, neutral, unremarkable air. I stood there for longer than was necessary. Carol asked me from the doorway if everything was all right. I told her the place smelled fine. Patricia's judgment did not answer the question I most needed answered. At what point does negligence become something with a harder name? I do not know where that line is. I know Barry knew the mould was there before I arrived. I know he sent a man with a spray bottle. I know he wrote the words lifestyle factors in an email to a sick student. And I know that none of that, in the end, crossed the threshold. So here is the question I want to leave you with. If you had been Patricia, sitting with that remediation notice and that medical diagnosis and those emails, where would you have drawn the line? Because I have drawn it somewhere different to her, and I am still not sure which one of us is right.